Okay, so in order to gain some insight into the child's world, we can't design without having some insight into the child's world. So we've spent a lot of time with children in their natural environments, that is in their schools, working with them on particular activities to try and understand the nuances of engagement that is pertinent for that child. So we've worked with typically developing children in classroom activities, and we've worked with children on the autism spectrum in their specific social skills classes. So this slide has just got some photographs of children exploring the properties of objects. So we understand that children will process the object information in a different way than the typically developing children. And what we were interested in is, what actually engages them about that object, what is the sensory properties, but also what are the communication properties of that object. What is it about the object that they might want to share with others? So lots of information around the object was the early information that we needed to gather, so that when we try to translate that object into a digital world, we have some sense about what it is that is interesting for the child. So these are some examples of children exploring objects in different ways. When we had that information, we looked at a number of different scenes, because Echoes needs to be situated in a place where things can happen. You know, it's not just an abstract digital world. It has to be believable as a place where things can actually happen, that children want to take part in this world. So we explored a number of scenes. And this is a drawing of a desert island. And what the children did with the scenes, that they explored how the objects might help them to navigate around the desert island. And we wanted them to look at how they might help a partner around the desert island. So there were a number of activities that we were using objects as the communicative partner initially to find out where the children was interested and where they might use that object as a tool to communicate with another. We had to do this first before we could even start to build what Paul might do. It has to start with the child and where the child was at. So we did a number of workshops and activities, and then interpreted that data into the digital world. So the next slide shows how we use prototypes. Now, the importance of the prototype is that the information we were gaining in the real world could not be recaptured explicitly in the digital world. So what we wanted to do was try and find out ways in which we could keep that engagement, but also ensure that the environment itself is really, really simple. So what we needed to do is, what's the simplest thing we can get away with to ensure that a child is engaged, and then add complexities, or allow the child to add their own complexities. So the environment, in a sense, amplifies the interest of the child by keeping it simple. But we could only do that by creating a number of prototypes. So you can see here, this is really, really simple. The object that the child is touching there is a flower, believe it or not. And we needed to just find, well, will that be engaged, that level of information, will that be engaging enough? And actually, we were really surprised at how engaging it was, the simpler it was. So that we learned a number of lessons from that, which we're now taking into the garden scenes. So we used prototypes both as a way to appreciate whether the touch-sensitive system will work, but importantly, we needed to try and see, well, at what level can we ensure the child is engaged without making it too complex so that they become confused. So we had to reduce that confusion.
So it's really about engaging and motivating the children and working with children in order to inform how we further then develop the environment and the system. But we also work very closely with our specialist advisory group, which we call SAGE. And that is a group of teachers, speech and language therapists, parents, and older youngsters on the autism spectrum who are helping us to inform how we can further develop the Echoes environment. And it is also very much about thinking through how this technology can become immersed and become part of classroom practice and be immersed in the curriculum. So we have worked very closely with schools to actually train them in the CERTS approach. We had Emily Rubin come over from America to conduct 3 days of training for us in Birmingham, and the schools that we're going to be working with have undertaken CERTS training so that actually Echoes becomes an educational tool which is going to support the development of the CERTS curriculum and the CERTS philosophy, which is taking place more broadly in the school, and which is about us also working closely with the teachers to train them to develop and focus on children's social communication.
So whilst we understand that the potential of ECHOs is very broad, we're really concerned that it starts with the child, that we're learning from where the child is at any time. So in order to do this, we've worked with our advisory group in order to develop a number of personas. In computer science, they talk about child modelling. So if you have a model of the child, you can program the computer to behave in a particular way. But we know that no two children are going to be the same, and that, in fact, they're going to be as diverse as possible. So what we've tried to do is establish a number of different types of persona, different types of child that we may be considering would be playing with ECHOs, and a number of scenarios. And then we ask our advisors to say, well, what would happen next when this child is engaging with Paul? We're asking them to help us think about what the child might do, and to identify whether a child is engaged or not, whether a child is interested or not. Because we will come at it from our own particular lens, our own particular experience, but we need to know about the experience of the child in the classroom. So we need to have that information. So very much working with the teachers, that's part of our goal. It's really to ensure that whilst we know that it's an amazing research tool, it has the capacity to be an amazing research tool, we want it used in context. We want it to grow by being there in the environments where it will be used. So that's why we're working in this particular way with the specialist group. And that's some example of us working with our specialist group in a particular workshop. We've just about run out of time. But I mean, thank you very much for listening. We have room for some questions.
A little more than 1 minute.
We have a little more than 1 minute. Can we have the video, please? We have the video in the folder. Is that okay? We can show you a very short clip, which is Paul actually trying to communicate to the child to follow his gaze and to ask the child to do something. You will see that on the clip. Now, bear in mind this is a very early prototype, but it just gives you a flavour of what it is that we're trying to develop. Okay, I think we stopped the video there. We just wanted to give you a flavour. That's very early stages. The environment will become more complex, but the idea is to create a playful, exploratory learning environment which is enabling the children to develop their joint attention. And that's the purpose. And we're at the early stages now, but we wanted to take you through the process of how we've gone about developing this environment. Thank you.
Well, thank you.